Is it doing it?
Yes, perfect. Great. So you're recording, and then that gives, I have to leave to pick up a child from somewhere at 2:30. So that gives Tom the ability to close the course down and shut the Zoom down if I am already gone. So I'll turn it over to Tom, and I hope you all have a great conversation. Good to see you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody else to Judy's class about Moby Dick. Judy Parr is one of our second generation godmothers of HASP. Judy has been a HASP president, chair of curriculum and multiple curriculum subcommittees, and is a frequent HASP course instructor. Judy earned a BA from Hope College and MA and PhD degrees from The Ohio State University. Interested in literature and the history of ideas, she has taught HASP classes on a variety of literary works. She has studied Moby Dick in college and graduate school and reread it for pleasure more than 20 years ago, so she has a good memory. Judy enjoys reading books such as Tolstoy's War and Peace, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and Melville's Moby Dick, not only as a form of escape from a depressing political environment, but also to learn about people living in different times and places. She says, going along with Ishmael on the Pequod lets me travel by ship without having to put up with seasicknesses and doing the hard and dangerous work of killing whales. In this time of understanding white privilege and learning why Black lives matter, she looks forward to reading and discussing this book from the margins as narrated by Ishmael. Judy?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. In order to find out and identify who's all here, I'm going to briefly call the roll. And obviously I can see the names of some of you, but this is superfluous, but I still want you to unmute yourselves so that you can say here or, yeah, say that you're here. Ann Malpolder.
Here.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ann's been in a number of classes with me. Is this the first time that you've read Moby Dick, or have you read it before?
It is. It is. I'm surprised that I never read it as a student, but I'm enjoying it very much.
Daryl Koopmans.
Here.
Is this the first time you've read Moby Dick, or have you read Moby Dick before?
I tried writing Moby Dick before, and I got lost in the world of whales, and I dropped out. So this is the second time I'm trying to finish it.
Good for you. That's how I did it with War and Peace. I tried it a couple of times and could never get past the first 100 pages, but the last time I tried, I was able to get through it all.
Hey, good for you. Neat.
Okay, next one is Richard Swanson. Welcome, Richard. And have you read Moby Dick before?
Twice before.
Okay.
Wow.
So this is your third time. Good
Yes.
for you. Good for you. Good. Deborah Hancock.
Yes.
You're the iPad 1. Okay. All we see is iPad 1, but thank you. I have your voice. Oh,
Okay.
now I can see you. Now I can see you. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have you read Moby Dick before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's first time for you.
Yep.
Good. And Ben Hancock.
He's here too.
Okay, two sharing one iPad screen. That's great. Good for you. It's like you're on board and you're looking out of a porthole to see you. But it's great. And Ben, have you read Moby Dick before?
I've tried a couple of times.
Okay. You're like Daryl then. Yeah. Okay. Diane Hoyt. You read Moby Dick before?
Never. No.
Never. Okay.
Wonderful. I love it.
Okay, when you say never, I was thinking maybe you said you're one person that maybe you read first 5 pages and decided you shouldn't have signed up for this course.
No.
Oh no, okay, that's great. I'm glad you're loving it. So am I. Thank you. Then the next person on my list is Jean Nyheis. Jean has been in a number of courses before with me, and I welcome you aboard because you're a good discusser.
Good.
As is Anne. And perhaps the others will jump in and we'll all be good discussers. Is this the first time you've read Moby Dick?
First time.
Okay. Clay Stolfer. Absent. Let's see if he comes next time. Marcella Lee. Is this the first time you've read Moby Dick, or have you read it before? You're muted, so I can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself? Can you unmute yourself? Can you hold up your finger for how many times you've read Moby Dick? Oh, Marcella, I lost your picture now too. I know you're here. You'll surface again later.
How about that?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now. Have you
Okay.
read Moby? Have you read Moby Dick before?
I said, I answered yes and no, because I think back in college or high school, I read it, but I read it this way. When the action was good, I plowed through it. But if it got too philosophical, then I'd skip the whole chapter.
Oh.
Okay, that's how you read it. That's interesting. I read it somewhat a similar way with me this time, and maybe with some of you, when he got bogged down in the cetology of whales and some of the other just whale and mechanical things of how things are done. I read more fast, but unlike you, when it gets to philosophical musing, I just relax and let it soak in.
Oh, but I'm enjoying it. I like
Okay.
Ishmael.
I do too.
He's a wonderful person.
Yeah, Michael Seymour.
I'm
Is this
here.
the first time you've read it?
Yes,
Pardon?
this is my first time,
First
and
time.
I'm reading it in a digital version on my iPad and find myself doing a lot of checking of the dictionary.
Ah, yes,
Just
definitely.
A lot of words I think I understand, but you know, I click search and comes up with a definition. So it slows me down a little bit, but it really helps contextualize things.
I think I'm going to try to send each of you after this class, if I remember, a link to a text version of this, which I found very helpful. It's the complete text of it. It's put out, just look up the word Gutenberg, like the Gutenberg printer, and Moby Dick, and you'll get this version. And it allows you to look for specific instances of text. And I found it very helpful. For example, I was curious to know about the land of Nod, because it appears early, and I'm wondering if he refers to it again, and how many times does he refer to the whale as Leviathan, stuff like that, some esoteric interest, the kind of interest that Ishmael might have. Ishmael would have really liked it, I think, to have the searchable version of a text. At any rate, I'll try to send you the link for that if you might find that helpful in your reading, to, you know, like, where in the world did this come up before? I think I vaguely remember it, but where is that kind of question? And then finally, Tom, is this the first time you've read Moby Dick?
I've always thought that I had read it before, but it doesn't seem, the only thing about it that really has seemed familiar to me is Gregory Peck.
Oh, you saw the movie.
I did see the movie, but I thought but it does not seem that I don't think I probably actually read it before. No.
Okay. So the only person that's missing, I think, is the one person, Clay Stauffer, but we're all otherwise here. Welcome aboard. I'm going to, at this point, I think I'm going to reduce what I see of you, and I'm going to go into a PowerPoint. I've got a PowerPoint, but just only for today, and only for the first maybe third of the course today. And I want to start out with this first slide. And when I started thinking about this course, I was thinking reading Moby Dick in 2020. And I came upon this cartoon. It's an image by a cartoonist named Cooper. He's used an implicit metaphor of the coronavirus as a whale, and Trump as a ship captain looking through the wrong end of a telescope to make a misguided pronouncement. And what the ship captain is saying, just as I predicted, it's going away. And I thought, wow, somebody can use a contemporary event and of last year, more contemporary than now, and it's an allusion to Moby Dick. But the more accurate title for our course, Reading Moby Dick in 2021. And some artwork here that shows the whale. And this is sort of what happens toward the very end of the book. One of the ships, at least, gets in effect just bitten in half by the whale. And you see how fragile and helpless the men are, and how strong and powerful those whale teeth are. Chapter 133, The Chase. Both jaws, like an enormous shears, sliding further aft, bit the craft completely in twain. It happens. Now, a little bit about background. I want to start out, get some context for us. Herman Melville and some of his contemporary writers. I start out with Victor Hugo, a French person. He wrote Les Miserables, a novel, and then we get some Americans. These are all people that were born at the beginning of the 19th century and died in the 19th century, except for Leo Tolstoy. He lived into the 20th a good bit. But on the right are several European writers. Hugo's French, Charles Dickens is British, English, Leo Tolstoy is Russian. And then on the left, I've got American writers, and Herman Melville, I've got bolded here. He's in really good company. He was aware of Ralph Waldo Emerson, but not too keen on Emerson's essays. Thought they were a little bit, I don't know, too gaseous, I think would be a good word. And then Nathaniel Hawthorne became one of Melville's just dear friends. Edgar Allan Poe lived in the same time. He didn't live as long. He lived only 40 years, and Herman Melville lived 72 years. And Henry David Thoreau, they lived the same time, but I'm not sure that they ever crossed paths. Walt Whitman has a curious resemblance to Melville, and we'll get to talking about that later on, especially toward the very end of the novel. There are some things in Whitman's poetry that makes me think that some of he's credited with sort of inventing free verse, but I think there are portions of Moby Dick that have free verse characteristics, and I'm thinking that maybe we need to give more credit to Herman Melville than to Walt Whitman about inventing free verse. And then Emily Dickinson, also American, living during that time. They were some of the major writers. Now we'll talk a little bit about the background of him. Herman Melville was born in 1819 in New York City. And that was a time when slavery still existed in New York City when Melville was born. His father's father had come from England, and his father Allen's declining income required several moves northward from Manhattan, up the Hudson River and to various towns. And when Herman was 11, his family moved to the Albany area, where his mother's family was very well established. His father was Unitarian leaning. That means he was sort of a Unitarian and probably didn't go to church every Sunday. His father died in 1833, leaving his widow and 8 children impoverished. Herman was second from the oldest at that time, and he was only 14 years old when his father died. You see Alan Melville on the far left here. And it's a portrait, portrait from in 1810. This was before, this would be before Herman was even born. But as a young man, he looks sort of like a rascal to me. In the middle, you get Herman Melville, a painting in 1846-47. This would be several years before Moby Dick was published in 1850 or 51. And then his mother, Maria Gansford Melville, rather elegantly dressed, and she shows off, I think, perhaps some of the wealth that she has by how she's dressed here. From his mother's side of the family, let's see, did I mention that his father died? Yeah. And Herman Melville was only 14 years old when his father died. So in some ways, he may, in his adulthood, have somewhat the feeling that he has, in some way, an orphan. And I think Ishmael kind of resembles him in that regard. Now, on his mother's side of the family, she had Dutch heritage, and she lived in the Hudson River Valley. His mother's name was Maria Gansevoort, Dutch name, but she was very committed to the Calvinist creed of the Dutch Reformed Church. And from the novelist, received the rudiments of a religious education. And you see in evidence in the Moby Dick, I think, of a really intimate, very deep, I think, understanding of Scripture. And he's got a lot of biblical allusions, and some of his characters are Ahab, Elijah, Ishmael. Those are characters, names of Bible characters out of the Old Testament. And in his mother's exposure of him to Christianity and the Reformed expression, he through his church, I think his attendance, he probably went to catechism. He encountered the ultimate questions of religion. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And I think those are some of the questions that he carries with him through Ishmael, let's say, the narrator in this novel. In the spring of 1839, at the age of 20, this would be after his father had died, he sort of had to make way for himself in the world. He found work as a cabin boy aboard a merchant ship that plied the route between New York and Liverpool, carrying cotton and a few passengers. And then later, working on boats in the upper Great Lakes and the Mississippi River, he saw Native Americans of several tribes living much as they had lived for centuries before the white man came. And so he's getting his education by experience in the world around him. Melville sailed from Fairhaven, Massachusetts on a whaler, the Acushnet. It's named after a river, I think, in a river on near New Bedford, or it's on Nantucket. Anyway, the whaler, he sailed on a whaler in the first week, leaving on the first week of 1841. And you notice in our story, Moby Dick, that the boat leaves just gets ready before Christmas, and the boat leaves around shortly after New Year's Day, if not on New Year's Day itself. In 1842, Melville, well, after he'd been on this whaler, deserted the whaler. A number of people on the whalers, when the whalers stopped maybe at an island to get replenishment of foods or to get things fixed, a number of people would just decide that it wasn't cut out for them, and they just abandoned it. And then maybe when another ship came by, they'd get on that. And that's sort of what Melville did. He a year later, after he had gone on the Acushnet as a whaler, he deserted it and landed in one of the Marquesan Islands in the Pacific. He spent about a month with the inhabitants of the Typee Valley. Later in 1842, after boarding the second whaler, he arrived in Tahiti. It's the setting for his second novel, Omu. In 1843, Melville arrived in Hawaii, and was called the Sandwich Islands at that time. And there he observed abuses of the natives by white missionaries. We'll hear a little bit, or we'll read a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And there he enlisted as a seaman in the U.S. Navy and boarded the frigate of the United States, arriving in Boston in October 3, 1844. So he spent nearly 4 years at sea, and this was very fertile time for his imagination. And I'm sure it was the seed time for the ideas that became the books that he wrote later. And during this time, while he was at sea, he happened to come upon a manuscript, or a book itself, of Owen Chase's account of the sinking of the Essex by a vengeful whale, written by Owen Chase. And Chase was certain as to the vengefulness of this whale. His narrative and the circumstances of the first reading of it, it really affected Melville's imagination powerfully. And for many years, he saw it was in his mind. And many of us have read, if you participated in last year's Big Read, a book based on the sinking of the Essex was written and discussed by many people. And the author of the book was Nathan Philbrick, and the title of the book was In the Heart of the Sea. According to Melville scholar Herschel Parker, few Americans of Melville's time knew better what colonialism and imperialism looked like up close. And no American writer of his time had Melville's intimate experience of life among natives of another race in their own world, that is in the interior of the Pacific Islands. Not deeply, these natives were not yet deeply contaminated by contact with the occasional runaway sailor of recent decades, and not yet reached by missionaries. No other American writer of his time had Melville's intimate experience with living in close quarters for prolonged periods of time with many men of different races, nationalities, ages, and levels of learning. And we'll see that when we learn next week. We'll spend more time on getting to know some of the people who are the characters in this novel. Away from the U.S. civilization, rooting under the Southern constellations that he identified as making him turn receptive to new ideas, Melville developed a deep sense of cultural relativity that set him at odds with the pious conventionalities of society. And we'll see some of that expressed in the Moby Dick when we talk about it and see these passages in just a few minutes. These are question. Okay. What we're going to see here is a list of his publications. I had indicated that there were about 3 books that he wrote before Moby Dick, and this list indicates that there were 5 books before. So, but the major ones here were Typee and Omu, and they were a peep at Polynesian life, a narrative of the adventures of the South Seas, and then Moby Dick. And after Moby Dick, and Moby Dick didn't sell nearly as well as Typee and Omu. And after that, he really didn't write anything until maybe Billy Budd, and that was kind of unfinished. And when it was discovered in 1924, there was a kind of revival of interest in Melville. But unfortunately, he did not experience the success that, for example, Nathaniel Hawthorne did with writing The Scarlet Letter around 1850. Moby Dick just did not sell well. Any comments or questions so far? Then we'll take a look at an excerpt from Typee. This gives you an idea of the kind of things that may have either created a readership for it or turned people off. In some ways, Melville was sort of flirting with unpopularity by expressing himself as he saw it. And I'm going to read from chapter, let's see, what chapter is this? I can't, 26 here. He's talking about the natives of Typee. Ill-fated people, I shudder when I think of the change a few years will produce in their paradisiacal abode, and probably when the most destructive vices and the worst attendances on civilization shall have driven all peace and happiness from the valley. The magnanimous French will proclaim to the world that the Marquesas Islands have been converted to Christianity. And this the Catholic world will doubtless consider as a glorious event. Heaven help the isles of the sea. The sympathy which Christendom feels for them has, alas, in too many instances proved their bane. How little do some of these poor islanders comprehend when they look around them that no inconsiderable part of their disasters originate in certain Tea Party excitements under the influence of which benevolent-looking gentlemen in white cravats solicit alms, and old ladies in spectacles and young ladies in sober russet gowns contribute sixpences toward the creation of a fund, the object of which is to ameliorate the spiritual condition of the Polynesians, but whose end has almost invariably been to accomplish their temporal destruction. Let the savages be civilized, but civilize them with benefits and not with evils. And let heathenism be destroyed, but not by destroying the heathen. The Anglo-Saxon hive have extirpated paganism from the greater part of the North American continent, but with it, they have likewise extirpated the greater portion of the red race. I think this expression here puts them in tune with a lot of people right now in 2021 who are realizing that America has had an original sin, one of which is slavery, and the other was the stealing of lands from the native indigenous peoples of our country. And I think he'll find a lot more sympathy with what he wrote here now than he maybe did at the time when missionary activity was just beginning to boom in the mid-19th century. Another novel that he wrote after Typee was Omu. I'll read just an excerpt from that about Queen Pommery. It is well to learn something about people before being introduced to them, and so we will here give some account of Pommery and her family. Every reader of Cook's Voyages must remember Otto, who in that navigator's time was king of the larger peninsula of Tahiti, subsequently assisted by the muskets of the Bounty's men. Mutiny on the Bounty is a familiar story. He extended his rule over the entire island. This Otto, before his death, had his name changed to Pommery, which has ever since been the royal patronymic. He was succeeded by his son, Pommery II, the most famous prince in the annals of Tahiti. Though a sad debauchee and drunkard and even charged with unnatural crimes, he was a great friend of the missionaries and one of the very first proselytes. During the religious wars into which he was hurried by his zeal for the new faith, he was defeated and expelled from the island. And after a short exile, he returned from Eimeo with an army of 800 warriors, and in the Battle of Narai, routed the rebellious pagans with great slaughter and reestablished himself upon the throne. Thus, by force of arms, was Christianity finally triumphant in Tahiti. And then one from White Jacket. Wulu, wandering about the gun deck in his barbaric robe, seemed a being from some other sphere. His tastes were our abominations. Our tastes were his abominations. Our creed he rejected. His creed we rejected. We thought him a loon. He fancied us fools. Had the case been reversed, had we been Polynesians and he an American, our mutual opinion of each other would still have remained the same. A fact proving that neither was wrong, but both right. And so I think this is a very compact expression of some of the thinking that goes behind what we're reading in Moby Dick, certainly Melville's thinking, and that is a kind of relativism, an ability to put himself in another person's shoes and try to understand another point of view. It creates a kind of a state of relativism, what's truth when you are both, depending on where you are and how you grew up, you see truth from different lights, and it gets expressed, I think, in some ways in the novel, particularly in the chapter that we'll get to in about 3 weeks from now, in the doubloon, where several people look at a gold coin and see in it various things. The whole notion of point of view, I think, is an important one that Melville played with. And obviously in the beginning, we're getting our what we see and experience of being on the ship comes through the experience and mind of Ishmael. Melville dedicated Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne, his friend. And when you read what he says about him, it reminds me in some ways of the relationship that's kind of with Queequeg. It's a very, very close friendship. Let's put it that way for now. So I'm going to read this. A day after reading a letter from Hawthorne, Melville responded in a letter written 17th of November of 1851. I felt pantheistic then, after reading the letter. Your heart beat in my ribs and mine in yours, and both in God's. It sounds like something out of the Gospel of John about the vine, the branches. He and me and I and him and this kind of thing. A sense of unspeakable security is in me this moment on account of your having understood the book, that is the Moby Dick. I have written a wicked book and feel spotless as the Lamb. I've written a wicked book and feel spotless as the Lamb. Whence come you, Hawthorne? What right do you drink from my flagon of life? And when I put it to my lips, lo, they are yours and not mine. I feel that the Godhead has broken up like the bread at the supper, and that we are the pieces, a kind of communion here expressed in an almost sacrilegious way. Hence this infinite fraternity of feeling. I shall leave the world with more satisfaction for having come to know you. Knowing you persuades me more fully than the Bible of our immortality. I have not ever read an expression of friendship so extreme as this. It's notable. And here you see a picture of Melville as he had the daguerreotype made a kind of early photography in 1848.
Does it seem like Hawthorne felt the same?
I don't think so. As a
Oh.
matter of fact, shortly after Hawthorne inscribed the book shortly after Melville inscribed the book to Hawthorne, they were living within like 30 miles of each other in the Berkshire Mountains for several months. But after the book was dedicated, and maybe after Hawthorne received a letter like this, he was probably taken aback, and Hawthorne moved away. Actually, I think for a while he was out of the country. And I think that Melville felt a little bit snubbed and slighted by this. It was not a mutual and reciprocal friendship, let's put it that way. Although early on, Hawthorne certainly did encourage Melville as a writer, and probably listened to and read through various drafts, and they discussed various literary topics together. Obviously, Melville came at it with a lot more emotional vigor than Hawthorne, who is more reserved and perhaps older. No, let's see, they're about the same age. At any rate, it wasn't the same intensity of affection on both sides.
Judy,
Any other questions? Yeah, comment.
more of a comment than a question.
Okay.
It's fascinating to be participating in the HASP class on the history of the Black Church at the same time that we're now talking about the same period of time.
I agree.
Especially given the references by Melville in terms of things he was finding during his travels. In some way, you could argue that you cannot run from the issues that we're facing in this country in terms of the way people were being treated in the name of Christianity, that you're finding no matter where you go.
Yep. There are various expressions, and we'll come to that later in our hour, I think, our hour that's left to us. Let's see, where do I want to go at this point? Let's see. Let's go to the book. I'm not sure if, let's see, do I want to? Yeah, let's go to the book at this point, and I'm going to see if I can just reduce this and get back to everybody here. Okay. I want to see. I'm putting aside my shared screen, I think. What are you seeing on your screens? Are you seeing people, or are you seeing something else?
Just you.
Just me.
I'm seeing the PowerPoint screen with just a few people on the sidebar.
Okay. You still seeing the PowerPoint screen?
Yes.
Okay.
At least I am.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm going to resume the share at this point. I want to, I'm in a good place here. I just simply overlay on my screen the people here. And so I can see all of you better. There are ways that you can drag a corner of the screen that has people on. I've got it in gallery view so that we can see each other better. And we're going to be discussing now things from the book. And raise your hand if you bought the Third Norton Critical Edition. Okay, so we have about 2 of us that have that edition, which has a lot of helpful material in it. And others, if you don't have that, that's fine too, because what I'm going to do as we discuss things perhaps later, when we're focusing on particular instance of text, we will, I'll have the text in front of us and on the screen. But right now, let's go looking through the book. Open your book, and I'm going to walk us through. I hope you have your books with you. Each time you come to class, be sure to have your book, because you'll want to follow along with some of the things that we talk about. And in my book, you see a very plain on just a opposite Arabic number 3, where we get the table of contents. We have this the inscription that Melville used has in his book, in token of my appreciation for his genius, this book is inscribed to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Very unornate but plain, but that's fine. And then we have the contents, and you find in here, it's a big book, but there are a lot of chapters, but most of these chapters are pretty small. And so you can read as much as you want in a sitting, and you don't have to feel like you have to read a whole lot, whatever. And the first chapters that will probably won't get much further beyond today, the chapter that starts with loomings, the first chapter, through chapter 21, going abroad, are the so-called land chapters. They haven't yet gone on the whaleboat. And so we're going to cover that material today, I think, for sure. And you'll see that I'm focusing on the first 3 chapters, maybe a little heavier than I will a lot of other chapters. Some of them I'll skip entirely, but really I think that the opening chapters are really significant to give us an insight about who this Ishmael is and why he wants to take a whaling voyage. After that, we get a page of entomology. He really, Ishmael, or the writer, let's say Melville, really gets into his subject. I mean, he's a researcher. He goes to all the different languages to find out what's the word for whale, etymology, and then extracts. And some of these extracts, I mean, it's just like he did a tremendous amount of reading to get all this material just to prepare himself for the writing the book. And the extracts are presented pretty much in chronological order. And it starts out all the way back in Genesis, and it goes through some of the Old Testament. What I was amazed at is the one after, it's probably about the 5th one of the extracts, and it's from Isaiah. And it's Isaiah 27, verse 1. Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1. It's on the edition that many of you have, or 2 of us have. It's on the top of page 8. But the extract from Isaiah, I'll read it. In that day, the Lord, with his sore and great and strong sword, shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Now, God created in Genesis, creation is a very good thing. But by the time we get to Isaiah the prophet, we have the Leviathan identified with the serpent. Of course, it's the serpent that is responsible in some ways for the fall of man. The serpent tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden and within the first few chapters of the book of Genesis. And so the Leviathan is demonized. And we find in this book, of course, obviously, Ahab sees the Leviathan, especially Moby Dick, in this way. It's a very negative thing. It's a thing to which you want to work your vengeance against. Anyway, a number of these other quotations, just it shows how extensively he's read this. And as he indicates later on, maybe I'll even point it out when we get there, but I'll jump ahead right now. He mentions that, and this is true of not only Ishmael, but himself, and that is, he doesn't consider that he's been educated at all until he was about 25 years old. That's when he started reading all these books. But he said, I got my Harvard and Yale was really on a whaling ship. That appears and we'll get to it, and I'll point it out when we get there, but it came to my mind now, so I put it in front of you now. So he's well read, but only after he's about 25 years old. All that before were pertinent experiences while he's doing the whaling. Loomings.
Judy?
Yes.
He seems to have such a vast vocabulary.
Yes.
It would seem to me hard to gain that kind of vocabulary on a whaling ship with a bunch of, blue collar type workers.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's an odd combination. And when Ishmael is speaking or writing, he comes across as being well read, rather. It's kind of, you have to kind of suspend your disbelief about where Ishmael's coming from. Yeah, and the vocabulary, the shipping vocabulary is. And by the way, if you've got the book that the Norton edition, there's a nice glossary of shipping terms. But otherwise, you're going to have to be using your dictionary a fair amount, or just keep reading and it'll come to you. Or you don't have to know everything. Keep reading along. We know how the story ends, and so But the Call Me Ishmael, I want to mention a few things about that. When I mentioned to my friend Henry Ploegstra that I was teaching Moby Dick, he said, "Oh, we've been reading that in our place at Freedom Village," and he said that we studied it in our in-house book group a year or so ago, and one point that we had a great discussion about were the first three words, "Call me Ishmael." We never do find out what his real name is. He's an unknown quantity from the opening words. Indeed, the whole book is infused with the unknown and the unknowable. At the end of the text, then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on as it rolled 5,000 years ago. The mystery's never resolved. It remains unknown, and the sea rolls on. Anyway, that was his response to Call Me Ishmael. Ishmael, tell me someone from the group here, who is Ishmael? Why, what's the significance of the name? Anyone?
Well, he was the son of Abraham by what I can't remember her name now, begins with an H. Who was eventually
You're close. You're close.
Was put aside, was set out to die, and became the historical precedent of Islam. But they were the outcasts. And I was wondering if Call Me Ishmael was Melville's way of saying I am an outcast. I'm that is ideologically, and I'm arguing the from the point of view of a person who doesn't buy into all of the standards of the time.
Oh, I think he's very much like you're describing it. He's looking at life from the margins, and he's seeing things that the conventional people are not seeing. And yeah, very much I think the name is chosen for good reason. Now, Richard Swanson, I see your hand up. Do you want to say something? You want to unmute yourself? You need to unmute yourself.
No, I have nothing to say. I didn't raise my
Okay,
hand.
I saw your hand up. There's a little hand that's in your box. You must have, okay.
Nope.
Okay, I'll disregard that. Okay. Anything else that you want to say about your impressions of Ishmael?
I like him a lot.
Why do you like him?
Just the way he takes to Queequeg. He's so open-minded, and I just like him a lot.
Okay, very good. Okay.
I love his language. It flows right at the very beginning when he's talking about why he goes to sea, that when he starts to get down in the dumps, then he needs to go out to sea.
I like that, and I'm going to read it out loud. Call me Ishmael, some years ago, never mind how long precisely. Having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself going grim in the mouth, whenever it is damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypochondria, gets such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then, whenever all of this, then I account it a high time to get to the sea as soon as I can. A great periodic sentence. Those who study rhetoric will say, I mean, this is like Cicero right here. All of this pile up, whenever this, whenever that, whenever, whatever. Then I feel like I need to go out to sea. Beautiful sentence. And this is my substitute for a pistol and ball. I mean, instead of committing suicide, I just go to take a whaler's trip. He reveals so much of himself here, negative as well as positive in a way, but he's just easy to identify with. So instead of committing suicide, he goes to sea.
When Ishmael seems to be so much of an autobiographical representation of Melville's own, nonconformity and wanting to chide and kind of prod society with what he has to write.
Right. And now I'm going to jump around to the next sentence that starts out about 2 paragraphs beyond that. Circumambulate. Now, what a sentence, what a word like that, circumambulate. I mean, I think it means walk around, but he uses this big word, a Latin word, circumambulate the city of a dreary Sabbath afternoon. Go from the Coriolis Hook to Coenty Slip, and from thence by Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reverie. Some leaning against the spikes, some seated on the pierheads, some looking over the bulwarks of the ships from China, some aloft from the rigging as if striving to get a better view of seaweed. All of this, and I've got a picture of that. Let me get back if I can do it. I'll share screen again and bring up a PowerPoint where I had it. I am share screen. Okay. Let me see if I can bring it up. No, going back up. This one. This is what he sees. I mean, this is a picture from the New York harbor from the Battery in 1829. You see the pictures there. You've got the ships in the sea. You've got people strolling along, but they are all drawn as if by magnet to go to the water's edge. And Ishmael feels the same way. And so we get this photograph. And later on in Loomings, he ends a paragraph by saying, meditation and water are wedded forever. And now he's asking toward a few paragraphs down from that, why do various people go to the ocean, and why? It begins a number of the sentences on the second page of the chapter, Loomings. And after that, he says that, why did the Greeks give it, that is the sea, a separate deity, Poseidon, and make him the own brother of Jove? Surely all of this was not without meaning, and still deeper still the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It's the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all.
Judy?
Yes.
This question comes a little bit late, but what does the word loomings mean?
Loomings?
Yeah.
Let me see. I think there's a note in our book about what loomings means. According to the Norton Critical Edition, looming means dimly seen land or ships ahead or even behind the horizon. Things that are dimly seen, loomings. And we're going to see some loomings in the chapter on the Spouter Inn. Loomings. Okay. Yeah. And there's also a kind of weaving that happens later on when they were making a mat that kind of resembles a weaving loom. I'm not sure if there's a relationship between those kinds of looms, but loomings are things that are very dimly perceived. Yeah, good question. So we have later in this chapter, Ishmael, he has so many questions, and he has so many reasons for, why he wants to, when he feels like he needs to go to get on a boat and go into the sea, on the sea. He explains in chapter 1, he says, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor. He doesn't go as a tourist. He doesn't go as a merchant. He goes as a simple sailor. And why does he go as a simple sailor? He explains this in a paragraph that says, what of it? If some old hunks of a sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks, what does that indignity amount to, Wade? I mean, in the scales of the New Testament. Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything the less of me because I promptly and respectfully obey the old hunks in this particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Who ain't a slave? Here he is. He's living in a time of slavery, and now he considers himself, perhaps by becoming just a kind of cabin boy, so to speak, on a whaling ship, someone who has to take orders from a lot of different people. The lowest of the low, perhaps. He's willing to do it. Who ain't a slave? He's identifying here with slaves, and I think that helps him. It's almost a kind of foreshadowing of the fact that he's going to first be afraid of Queequeg, but later on he's going to find Queequeg to be and Queequeg is a black person from the Polynesian Islands, and he's going to identify in some ways with Queequeg, especially some of his religious feelings. Who ain't a slave? In a way, look at it, we're all slaves, especially if we have to work for a living. And then he goes in, another reason why he goes because, let's see, the first reason is he goes as a sailor, and he goes because, he says, because I promptly and respectfully obey these captains and other people. So he's going sort of out of an obedience, a sense to abase himself to be a servant on a ship. Second reason is he goes because they pay him for his trouble. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor because they make a point of paying me for my trouble. In the next paragraph, go to sea as a sailor because of the wholesome exercise and pure air. Okay. Later on in that paragraph, he says that, but wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me and secretly dogs me and influences me in some unaccountable way, he can better answer that than anyone else. And doubtless my going on this whaling voyage formed a part of the grand program of Providence that was drawn up sometime long ago. This is a little bit of his Calvinist background, I think, slipping in, maybe not. It's also a feeling that you get when you're reading some of the old Greek epics, that a lot of what we think happens to us is controlled and out of our control because there's a providence or Jove or providence that manipulates the fates, and the fates are determining what our events are, what's going to happen to us. And he says it came as a sort of brief interlude and solo before more extensive performances. And there are performances in this novel. There are parts in there that seem like they're almost a drama, a play where people are playing parts. But he goes on to say that I take it that this part of the bill must have run something like this. And toward the very end of that first chapter, you see these three lines, three statements. Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. That refers to 1824, when there was a candidate that received a majority of electoral votes in the House of Representatives, but he was voted for, the majority voted for John Quincy Adams over the popular vote winner of Andrew Jackson. In 1824, Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but the Electoral College, so to speak, had put in place John Quincy Adams. Does that sound familiar? The next one, that's the whaling voyage of one Ishmael. He's between these headlines. And the next one after that is Bloody Battle in Afghanistan. That was based on the British fought Afghanistan in 1838 to 42 and didn't do well. And, you know, talk about our late 20th century experiences. Well, our 21st century experiences in Afghanistan after 9/11. So, I mean, some of these things just kind of reverberate for us when we're reading this thing in 2021. Though I can't tell why it was exactly that these stage managers, the fates, put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage when others were set down in magnificent high tragedies. anyway, he goes on and says, I can't tell why this was exactly. Talks about it being a kind of a pretentious thing that's happening. And then we get to anything else in the loomings. I think I covered most of the highlights, and I probably given a long time about it, but we've got still a half hour yet. Any
Judy,
questions about loomings? Yes.
when that was just, it struck me that Ishmael's reasons to go on the voyage are kind of captured by the personalities and characters of the three mates on board. One of them's a Christian who's kind of, he sees everything as spiritual.
That's that's Starbuck?
That's Starbuck. And then Stubb sees, he's a fatalist and sees, he's kind of cool in moments of crisis, and which I think Ishmael would, admire. The third guy, Flask, was there for the adventure of it, and which I think he was also pursuing.
That's right. Good observation. I think that you're right on it. Good. Anything else? Anyone else want to say something about that first chapter? Okay, we'll jump to chapter 2. And at this point, we've got him arrived. He left Manhattan, the place that you're seeing in the picture right here in our PowerPoint. He left Manhattan to go to New Bedford, and he goes from New Bedford later then to Nantucket. But in New Bedford, he stays several days because the boat that he was supposed to go on, or could have gone on, it had just left. And so he has to wait for another whaler to become available. And anyway, he's waiting here. But he goes through town. And one thing I think that really struck me is an experience with what he called the Negro Church. And if you are in chapter 2 and you go about the second page, I'm going to read something about what he experiences when he's just walking around. He's looking for, we all have similar experiences sometimes. You go to a place and you're driving in your car and you've got to pick a motel to stay in for the night. And you go past, they all post their rates, and you look at them and you think, is this going to be a good place? Is it going to be too expensive, or is this going to be just not appropriate? So he's going through this walk to find out where's he going to stay for the night. And this is one of the places he walks past. He's in an area of town in New Bedford. And the paragraph begins, such dreary streets, blocks of blackness. It's night, it's dark. On either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. He's setting the mood here. At this hour of the night, of the last day of the week, that quarter of the town proved all but deserted. But presently I came to a smoky light proceeding from a low, wide building, the door of which stood invitingly open. It had a careless look, as if it were meant for the uses of the public. So, entering, the first thing I did was to stumble over an ash box on the porch. Ha, thought I, ha, as the flying particles almost choked me. Are those ashes from the destroyed city of Gomorrah? What a strange thing comes to his mind. I mean, Gomorrah has just been destroyed, and these are the ashes. But this is his mother coming through. He probably remembered some sort of a Sunday school class, and ashes reminds him of Gomorrah. But the crossed harpoons and the swordfish, these are some of the signs in front of the building. This then must needs be the sign of the trap. However, I picked myself up and hearing a loud voice within, pushed on and opened a second interior door. It seemed the great black parliament sitting in Tophet. Tophet means hell.
Oh.
100 black faces turned around in their rows to peer, and beyond, a black angel of doom was beating a book in the pulpit. It was a Negro church, and the preacher's text was about the blackness of darkness, and the weeping and the wailing, teeth gnashing there. Ha, Ishmael muttered, backing out wretched entertainment at the sign of the trap. So this is his experience of the black church. Now several of us are in Fred Johnson's class that's operating the same time ours is, and we're getting exposure to what the black church is. And according to Fred Johnson, the Black Church is a church where, in order to get away from the white gospel of obedience and subjugation and obeying your elders and obeying your masters, and not finding much of hope, the Black Church was started by people that really found hope in the Exodus story, and latched onto that and were interested in issues of justice and rather than obedience. And what about this Black Church? It's not quite like Fred Johnson describes a Black church as a welcoming place. What are your impressions of this experience of his going into a Negro church?
Well, it's interesting to me that it's in the dark of night in this area of total blackness. On
The context, yeah, the context, the time context, the atmospherics, yeah.
And then that the feeling inside is the same as it was outside.
Yes. And he felt very out of place, I'm sure, because as he mentions, he saw all these hundreds of faces turning back to see him at the door. Like he felt out of place, I think, and very conspicuous, and he didn't think it was a pleasant experience for him. And he was looking for a place to spend the night, obviously not in this Black church. But this is an impression that he and now his readers are getting of maybe a representative example, but maybe not such a representative example of a Black worship service. By the way, the text about the blackness of darkness is from Jude chapter 1:13, and I'll read it. It begins, woe to evil ones, raging waves of the sea, foaming out of their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. The blackness of darkness, exact words out of Jude, out of the New Testament. So it's a biblical.
It may also have been that his experience with church didn't include Black people at church.
Right. Oh, I'm sure of that. Right. When you're saying his experience, Ishmael's experience.
Yes, Ishmael's experience.
Right.
Well, it's another example of him feeling marginalized. He's kind of like he's marginalized even within the marginalized.
That's right. That's right. Excellent observation. Yes.
It might have been somewhat similar to the expressions given of Jonathan Edwards and his type of
sinners in the hands of an angry God. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And here the hell here is given in the Black church, similar to what Jonathan Edwards would communicate.
Oh, I think so. There's a similarity here. Right. Anything else about the experience in the Black church? Otherwise, we're going to jump to the Spouter Inn. And I want to spend some time with the first paragraphs of that. Let's see if I can. I'm going to read the paragraphs. I'll look at this picture first. In the late, about 1848, 49, Melville went to England. He was trying to work out publishing arrangements for his book, White Jacket. And while he was there, he went to an art gallery and he saw some paintings by Joseph Turner. And one of the paintings he saw was this one in whalers. Turner painted the pursuit of a whale in the North Pacific. And at the right, you see a harpoon right here. I think you see my cursor. There's a whale that is bleeding and it's spouting there. There's something coming from its top of its head. While men in open boats, the whaling boats, generally 6 men to boat, but this one has a lot. Well, there's several close together. They stand with their arms raised to strike again at this whale here. Another picture that he saw in this exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts is this one. And I'm going to leave this one up. He claimed that he was inspired by reading, Turner had read one of these books that the extracts had also had a quote from. and Turner's impressionistic oil paintings may have influenced Ishmael's description of the large oil painting in chapter 3, The Spouter Inn. We'll see what you think after I read some of that. Turner's impressionistic whalers likely influenced Ishmael's description of an oil painting in The Spouter Inn. And we'll start at looking at chapter 3 here. I'll read some of the opening verses here, the opening lines. Entering that gable-ended Spouter Inn, you found yourself. Now he's saying you, and there's a lot of you in here. And I think it's an effective way of drawing us as readers in. It's like he's talking to us right in front of us. It's a very colloquial and all that use of you. You found yourself in a wide, low, straggling entry with old-fashioned wainscots reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. Like in some ways, the Spouter Inn looks like an old ship. On one side hung a very large oil painting so thoroughly besmoked, in every way defaced, that in unequal cross-lights by which you viewed it, it was only by diligent study and a series of systematic visits to it and careful inquiry of the neighbors that you could in any way arrive at an understanding of its purpose. So here's a very curious man. He's going to find a place to stay overnight, but he looks and sees an oil painting. He's got to figure it out. And so he looks at it and he inquires of various people, what do you think it is? What do you think it is? And then finally he arrives at an understanding of the purpose. He's got to find, he's very curious to a fault perhaps. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought some ambitious young artist at the time of the New York Hags had endeavored to delineate chaos bewitched. And he, you know, you could look at this painting and say, yeah, it does look pretty chaotic, and it's hard to make out things. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation and oft repeated ponderings, and especially by throwing open a little window toward the back of the entry, you at last came to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not be altogether unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was a long, limber, portentous black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture over the three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless yeast. And so he's concerned about this area right here. Doesn't that look like a tail maybe of a whale? And here's the whale breaching, that is leaving the water in a leap. And it looks like he's breaching over the whaling ship here. And this looks like another whale, perhaps. This is a whale jumping over the ship. Maybe this is a whale in the foreground. Reading some more here. A boggy, soggy, squishy picture, truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet, was there a sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Ever and anon, but alas, the scripted idea would dart through you. It's this, it's that, and he names a number of things. And then he comes to finally say, in fact, the artist's design seemed this, a final theory of my own. Finally comes to a conclusion, sort of. Partly based on the aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed on the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner, that's a boat, in a great hurricane, the half-foundering ship weltering there with its three dismantled masts alone visible. There, well, you can sort of see, you can see sails here, maybe some masts above them. And an exasperated whale purposing to spring clean over the raft. This one, this black part right here, is an enormous act of impaling itself upon the three mastheads. So, what do we got here? What do we have? We've got a man who tries to make sense out of just about everything that he looks at, and he consults other people to get their opinions, and he has all kinds of hypotheses, and finally he thinks of something what it is. Anyway, this is the kind of mind we're working with, and we're reading not what he thinks, but we're getting into something of the process of his thinking, the way he makes decisions and comes to conclusions. And that's pretty much all I want to say, I think, at this point. Anything about that artwork or his interest into the Spouter Inn? He decides to stay there, right? And what's the problem that the landlord tells him about? What's the difficulty that's preventing him from having his own room?
He's pretty much filled up.
Okay, what is it?
Yeah, well, it's like he's only got a half a bed left, right?
Right. And he's sort of at the end of his rope, and he's deciding he's going to take it. But he wants to know from the landlord, tell me a little bit about this fellow who's going to be my bedmate here. And the landlord really recommends this place because he says, in effect, it's a large bed, and it's a bed that we actually I bedded my wife on when we first got married, and and what does he reveal about about Ishmael's soon-to-be roommate?
Well, I might be jumping ahead, but
Yeah, you okay.
he's not around right now, even though it's late.
Right.
I love this part because he's out trying to sell his head.
His shrunken heads.
Yes. But to Ishmael, what the landlord says is not his shrunken head, but he's out to sell his head. So poor Ishmael is very confused as to, well, how can he be out selling his head? And then the landlord explains that it's his shrunken head.
Right. And he's late in coming, and
he says he's the dark complected guy.
right. And it seems like we don't get the name Queequeg until very late. And so the whole experience, he realized, let's see. He notices that the man that comes finally into the room with him, let's see. Yeah, he's already, here we go. Ishmael goes to bed. He goes to bed. He's tired. He's made a good offing, he says, toward the land of Nod. The land of Nod, of course, is a kind of play on words. Nod is the place where Cain is driven after he has committed murder of his Abel, his brother. He had to go east of Eden, and he goes to the land of Nod. It's in Genesis 4:16. But here it means the land of Nod means going to sleep. He's using it as kind of play on words there. But the stranger enters the room. It's dark purplish yellow color skin, the black squares on his face, the tattoos. He's not making a good impression on Ishmael when Ishmael first notices him. And the sense in here, a nice phrase, ignorance is the parent of fear. That's for sure. He doesn't know anything about this new bedmate of his. And he says that it was now quite plain that this roommate, he must be some abominable savage or other ship around aboard a whaleman in the South Sea, and so landed in this Christian country. He's a pagan. He's not Christian. He's dark colored. He must be a heathen, and he finds out that he's got this little idol. As dark as a 3-day-old Congo baby, and yet he hears this Queequeg coming toward, as he's preparing for bed. He's singing some pagan psalmody or other, and it's hard for Ishmael to make all this out. And finally, at some point, toward the end of the chapter, or middle, The next moment, the light was extinguished, and this wild cannibal, tomahawk between his teeth, sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it. And giving a sudden grunt of astonishment, he, that is Queequeg, began feeling me. Later on, he shouts, "Landlord, for God's sake, Peter Coffin." I shouted, "Landlord, watch Coffin, say, angel, save me." And then Queequeg says, "Speaky, telly me who he be, or demi I kill ye," again growled cannibal. And amongst all this, then we get the landlord suddenly opening the door and said, "Don't be afraid now. Queequeg here won't harm a hair of your head." Now he finally gets the name of Queequeg. And so he's tattooed, and they make it through the night. Actually, the chapter ends by saying that well, I'm going to read another statement here toward about 3 paragraphs from the end of that chapter. "You get in," said Queequeg, motioning to me with his tomahawk and throwing the clothes to one side. He really did this, and not only in a civil, but a really kind and charitable way. I stood looking at him a moment. For all his tattooings, he was on the whole clean, comely looking cannibal. What's all this fuss I've been making about that? I thought to myself, the man is a human being, just as I am. He's just as much a reason to fear me as I have to be afraid of him. Again, this mutuality, putting himself in another person's shoes. Better sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. I love it. I love that conclusion there. And so he says, "Good night to the landlord. You must go." I turned in. Never slept better in my life. Good time.
I find this whole incident to be laced with so much humor.
Yes.
In addition to the astonishment and all, it did make me smile a number of times.
Yes, yes. And this reminds him in the next chapter in the counterpane of the experience he had with his stepmother. We got into some mischief trying to climb a chimney or something like that. And his stepmother made him go to his room, in effect, all day and all night. And then he ends up coming awake in the middle of the night and has a nightmare. And his experience with Queequeg brings back this memory. It almost reminds me, if you've read any of Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, it has a reminiscence of that effect, that it brings back an old child horrible nightmare that he had, or experience that he had. Let's see. Anything else about that first night experience that you want to bring up that struck you, or you want to talk about, you don't understand, or whatever?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
First of all, how do you say that guy's name?
Queequeg.
Wait, say it again.
Queequeg. Queee, Quee, and then Queg. Queeg. Queequeg.
Right. What makes him look like a cannibal?
Well, he's got tattoos all over him. His face is got tattoos, and the fact that anybody, and they figured out somehow that he's from the South Sea Islands, and there's this story that South Sea Islands, especially around Tahiti, they have cannibals that live in those islands. And so, perhaps an overgeneralization. Maybe Queequeg comes from an island that doesn't have cannibalisms, but the fact that he has these shrunken heads with him makes people suspicious of his behavior. And Queequeg, one of his favorite foods was steak. He was not a vegetarian. So
by his looks, later on in the book, it talks about he had teeth that were sharpened.
Yes.
So that must have been a ritual that he involved in at some point.
Right.
But then it talked about how he nibbled on something that he carried on his person. Would that have been something made of wood or of?
I don't. Can you point me to the nibbling part? I don't recall that.
I'll look it up by next time.
Okay, that'd be fine. Homework for you.
There were many references to the tomahawk, but it sounds like the
Yes.
tomahawk was just a pipe, not actually a weapon.
Right.
It was a smoking pipe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Been both.
Pipe that he smoked. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But it felt like a tomahawk too. And so, I mean, anytime you encounter a stranger that looks quite different, you often assume the worst things about him rather than the better things. And I think this assumption that he's a cannibal, that he's a savage, the word savage is repeated a number of times. There was also the notion at this time of a so-called noble savage. The people that are savages are people that are living in islands that are like paradise, perhaps. They're uncorrupted by civilization. A lot of the romantic writers in the 19th century had this notion of the noble savage. And I think that you get the criticism that we read earlier today about Omo and Taipi, when everybody's just fine on some of these islands until the missionaries come and bring civilization, and that somehow corrupts them, brings disease, for example. And so there's a notion of a noble savage that I think that we see in Quake. He is a noble savage. And let's see.
That's the beginning of chapter 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's more talking about Queek.
Okay.
Maybe I can find that where he nibbled at something.
Okay.
I don't know. But I don't think it wasn't a real person that he was nibbling at.
Okay, well, come next week with your nibble. Maybe I can try to look up nibble in the text version of it and see what we can learn about that.
Well, I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Okay. Well, that's your impression, though, and that's worth something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, now we've got breakfast. We're going to skip around to the street. We're going to jump some paragraphs to the chapel. It's another worship experience, and we get 5 minutes to talk about this. He goes into the chapel, and the chapel on each side of the pulpit are memorial stones to people that have lost their lives on sea. And the people in this church are quiet. I'm on chapter 7, the chapel, the beginning. They're quiet, they're silent, they sit apart from one another. It could be almost like a Quaker service, although a Quaker worship service would not have a sermon like we get in this one. There's a sermon. And what is the topic of the sermon?
Jonah.
Jonah. A very appropriate topic. And the interesting thing about this chapel too is, how does the pastor get up to the pulpit? He doesn't just walk up steps.
That's the ladder.
Yeah, there's a ladder. It's a kind of rope ladder you'd have to get from a whaling boat to get onto the main ship. It's a side ladder, and he uses that to get up to the pulpit. And so there's a lot of ship imagery in this. It's called the Whaleman's Chapel, so that makes sense. And so the sermon just happens to be about Jonah, a man who disobeyed God. God wanted him to go to preach to Nineveh. He decided, no, I don't want to do that. So I'll get on a boat and go away to the opposite direction, to Tarshish, I guess. And or he departed from Tarshish somehow. The word Tarshish sticks in my mind. Anyway, he disobeyed. There's the sin of disobedience. With this sin of disobedience in him, Jonah still flouts at God and seeking to flee from him. And so we've got an emphasis on the sin of disobedience. Anything else in this story of Jonah that you think seems unusual, or doesn't? Is there some addition to what you got in the Bible story of Jonah? Is there anything he omits or anything he adds that really struck you?
Well, there's Ishmael's conjecture that if heaven's really better than being on earth, then why do they have all this long-term mourning for their seamen who've gone?
Right. He has an unusual mulling about that. This is at the end of, yes, at the end of chapter 7. Methinks we have hugely mistaken the matter of life and death. Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is my true substance. Now, that's a kind of Platonic notion that we're just living lives of shadow and our real life is something more spiritual. Methinks that in looking at the things spiritual, we are too much like oysters observing the sun through the water and thinking that thick water, the thinnest of air. He's the imagery of oysters. It's like we really don't know enough of the whole world, of the universe, the cosmos, to be able to make some of these. Humans are like oysters. We have a limited perspective. Methinks my body is but the lees of my better being. That is the leavings. The body is something that's the dregs of something better. In fact, take my body who will. Take it, I say. It's not me. And therefore, 3 cheers for Nantucket, and come a stove body when they will. That is a body that's been broken in pieces. And if we're stave my soul, Jove cannot. That is, he believes that his soul is going to live longer than his body, and so he doesn't really care what happens to his body at this point. That's what he's sort of proclaiming, as I see it. It's not the most clear way of expressing things, but then Ishmael, we're all like oysters. We don't have a full perception of what the universe is, or time and eternity. One thing that I noticed go ahead.
A very quick note. At the beginning of chapter 10,
Yeah.
he quickly, and he's numbering on this this little Negro idol of his. That's all I'll say.
Okay. He's got this little
that's
Negro
what
island. We'll get to that next week. But I do want to mention one thing that really jumped out at me in here, and that is there's the reference that doesn't appear at all in the Jonah story, but it appears 4 times in here. It's a word that is the word fugitive. Then the captain knows that Jonah is a fugitive. Statement. Fugitive finds no refuge for his restless glance. Terrors upon terrors run shouting through the soul, all this cringing attitudes. The god fugitive is now plainly known. How plainly he's a fugitive. No baggage, not a hat box, or valet, or a carpet bag. No friends accompanying him to the wharf. This notion of Jonah as a fugitive is significant, I think, for this, because in 1850, there was an act that was passed called the Fugitive Slave Act.
Slave Act.
Yeah, it was passed by the Congress in 1850, and as part of the Compromise of 1850, and it required that all escaped slaves upon capture be returned to their masters, and officials and citizens of free states had to cooperate. The act contributed to the growing polarization of the country over the issue of slavery, and is considered one of the causes of civil war. It was arguably the most hated and openly violated piece of federal legislation in the nation's history. And using that word fugitive in here, the 4 times within that chapter, really jumped out at me. And I think that Melville very deliberately put those words in. And even though, according to Father Mapple's sermon, we should see Jonah as someone who disobeyed God, if you look at that word fugitive and you realize that Black people who were considered fugitives were being persecuted, you sort of flip and you begin to think, well, maybe what Jonah was doing as a fugitive had some merit, that sometimes fleeing from a bad situation is probably not all that objectionable. It is 2:30 and we have to call it a halt right here. And I know that we'll be skipping around and going faster through the more chapters. And I do want to spend some time on the worship practices of Queequeg. We'll get to know Queequeg a little bit. And then next week, we're going to read chapters that will get us more familiar with the rest of the characters in this voyage. Any comments or comments before we part ways for next week? We'll do a little bit more. I hope we'll do more discussing and I'll do less reading. All this background stuff kind of slowed us down, but we'll pick up our pace, I'm sure.
Well,
See you next
Judy,
week. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Judy, thank you so much for getting us into this. You've got us going on the right track, I think.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
just
very
got to
much.
figure out with Marcella what's this nibbling going on with Queequeg, and we'll figure it
Yeah.
out and get back in touch.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think he is nibbling on his little idol.
Oh wow!
But-
I wonder what you know. Is it
But
got
the
some
idol-
weed in
It has to
it?
be a wood. I can't.
In my version, it refers to whittling on the idol.
Oh,
So, I don't know if
whittling.
Yes,
I don't know. if
That makes
whittling-
sense.
that's what mine does
That
too.
makes sense. That makes sense. He's
Whittling on it, yes. That
Yeah.
that
So it's
first
not like a chocolate
paragraph,
Easter bunny.
the
Yeah.
first paragraph of chapter 10, yeah.
Okay. Whittling. Okay, I think that answers your question, Marcella. He's not nibbling, he's whittling at it. He's got a knife and he's carving his statue.
I guess
Okay, well,
I guess that clears it up. I'm not sure.
see, you know, that's one of the benefits. We all read this as a group. If somebody has a question, somebody else will maybe find the answer for it. So thanks for joining us on the voyage. We're still on land, but we're going to go on
yeah.
the ocean next week. Next week we'll be on the ocean together.
Thank you
See you
very
next
much,
week.
Judy.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good week,
Thanks a
everybody.
lot.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye-bye.